I'm Jonathon Young. I'm Artistic Director of Electric Company Theatre and the writer of the piece and one of the performers.
I'm Pite, and I'm a choreographer. I have my own company here called Pite, and I directed and choreographed the production. Speak up, please. Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm Diane McIntosh. I'm a psychiatrist here in Vancouver. I treat people who have PTSD, but also a wide range of psychiatric disorders, schizophrenia, bipolar, major depression, anxiety disorders. So I spoke to Jonathon at the beginning of all this and talked a little bit about PTSD and my experience, so that's why I'm here.
So Jonathon, now you kick us off.
Right, okay, well, so I had a traumatic event in my life several years ago now, and found myself a few years after that event still reeling from it and writing compulsively, not so much about exactly what happened or what I was doing day to day to survive it or to move on, more about just trying to figure out how, with words, I could somehow depict the state of disorder that I felt had overtaken me. And you know, people ask me about what was the impulse for writing this piece, and was it supposed to be therapeutic? Was it, you know? And I have to say that it wasn't about an attempt to. There's a lot of chairs moving around in the background. It wasn't so much about trying to heal myself. It was about trying to step outside the experience I was having and look at it as a kind of phenomenon that maybe I had some control over or could take interest in by describing it. And you know, to say enjoying it is probably going one step too far, but taking some pleasure in the writing process to articulate that, which is when I came to Crystal, was I had sort of described, I think, a state of affairs that I thought maybe could be staged somehow, and knew that the central tension in the piece would be between words and the body, words and actions, and had no idea how that was going to work, but I hoped that maybe Crystal would have a little window to help me with it. We began a conversation that it just so happened that she needed to create a new piece as well in the exact same time frame.
So, Crystal, what was your first reaction when Jonathon came to you? Because in a way, it's an unusual idea for a piece of theatre or a piece of dance.
Well, I think initially, of course, I was inspired by the idea of working with Jonathon. He's somebody that I know very well, and I've also known him very well as a performer. I've always had I guess people can't hear me. I see people waving. Is this helping? Okay.
Right.
All right. So I've always, like many choreographers in this city, had the wish to choreograph something for Jonathon. He's an amazing mover. He's not a trained dancer, but I think that makes him all the more interesting to us in terms of his the eccentricity of his movement, but also the realism in it, the articulation, the detail, the precision. So I've always wanted to choreograph something for Jonathon, and so when he approached me to direct him in this show that was beginning to take shape, I immediately wanted to, but of course I had to say no because it was in conflict with a project that I was planning with my own company at the same time. I mean, eventually we realized that we could bring those two projects together, and this project became the project that I was working on. So it just worked out so beautifully.
Yeah.
And right away, I think even in our first meeting over coffee, I had the impulse to bring dancers into the mix for a couple of reasons. One is that I felt like I could deliver the best of myself if I had dancers in the mix, that I could do with this material what I can do well, what I'm trained to do, what I've spent many years doing. But on the other hand, I felt that there was an element of both of animation, in terms of animating the space, animating Jonathon himself, and also a kind of decentralization. I think we'll probably get to that a little bit more in a minute, but thinking of being able to kind of move the story and move the protagonist and move the voice of the show through many different people, but that was an interesting thing to bring into the mix as well.
Mm-hmm.
And Jonathon, the first thing that you presented Crystal with, the first thing that you gave to Crystal was some writing. Can you describe a little what that was and what form it took?
Like I say, at that point, I was caught up in the idea of trying to create the sense of a show that had been running for a long time and which had been sort of hollowed out. The meaning had been hollowed out, and what was left were a series of movements or operations. And there was some text that was like a manual of operations, and there were some images that seemed to be like a variety show, a series of acts that were on reruns to the point of that they had lost their magic, they had lost their purpose, and yet whoever was subscribing to this show, whoever was in it, whoever was watching it was having to go through it again and again and again. And I think that I then had a series of descriptions of these images, and they were disconnected. They had some sort of, people are desperate to get into this topic. I know, we made a big joke about that.
Maybe someone can.
He's signaling there.
Okay. There they go. Coming around.
Okay. We won't act like anything. And I think that was kind of the extent of it. I don't know if any of those images made it into the show. So it was, what I think did survive was this idea of the terms being where the piece starts, which is somebody who is determined not to get thrown off course or driven into impulsive action or swept away by the need to run or respond without thinking. That our character at the beginning of the play is built himself a glossary, if you will, which I think has a feeling of kind of oppression and smallness and deadness. It is bound to fail, and one of the main factors is that he's determined to do it on his own, and that he doesn't need outside support, simply because I think he's so afraid of what he's been through, and he's determined to maintain his position in the present, away from the trauma and away from the using that he's become addicted to.
And just go on a little bit. So, at what point do you start to research the actual ideas of PTSD and bring those into it? And how did that alter your thinking?
Again, I think it was after we had talked, I realized that when we were bringing on designers, our amazing design team, we were talking to funders and producers, and Crystal and I were talking, and suddenly it was so terrifying to make this all about my inner world, my inner disordered, sad little world. And we were like, I'm turning this into a show for the public, so what is it about in the real outer world? What can we hold on to? And suddenly I went, it's about post-traumatic stress disorder. That's a national conversation that's happening. And I didn't know of any plays that I'd seen recently. I thought that's what it's about. And there are people out there who are suffering from it far worse than I was. And there are, I was never diagnosed with that disorder. That was when I went, okay, it's about something real and topical and a few degrees outside my own experience.
And Diane, was that when you were involved? Did you talk to Jonathon at that point? Or?
Somewhere around in that. Crystal and I were in our early stages.
I forgot about how you said we actually met, and I had forgotten.
Yeah, it was a long time ago.
This is showing
now.
my age.
Yeah.
I know, it was a long time ago.
And it was a short meeting.
But it was a very intense hour of lots of information back and forth during that time. Yeah.
And I took a lot of notes, some of which ended up in the play. My conversation with Diane, a few things that really struck me was this notion of the PTSD being an inflammatory disease, and that it's cumulative, that it builds to a point of boiling over. And there is a scene in the play where he is diagnosed, and the jargon is a little bit made up. I didn't want it to be an actual medical diagnosis, because it's obviously a labyrinth that he can't find a way through. But that certainly came, a lot of the things in the show came from our discussion and Diane's understanding of disassociation and coping mechanisms and all that kind of, those ideas very much shaped the structure of the piece.
And Crystal, from your point of view, I mean, Jonathan's kind of researching and bringing the ideas in. How are you moving the idea forward in terms of turning an idea about something into a piece of theatre, dance?
I usually just kept going through the exercise of trying to stage things in my head. So for example, Jonathan was talking about the glossary, which we had a really great afternoon thinking about how might one stage a glossary on stage, right? And
The most deadliest of theatrical forms.
and so I think that a great deal of our conversation went back and forth like that. Jonathan would do this incredibly intricate and complex and beautiful piece of writing, and I would read it many times, and then I would start to wonder, how might one stage that? And because I'm not a theater director, and because I've never, other than the Tempest, I've never really worked with an entire play, I'm very comfortable with working with scraps of narrative and things that don't relate necessarily, and being able to jump back and forth in different scenes, and I could do that quite comfortably. It became uncomfortable later on as we tried to actually make a 3-act structure, and I tried to wrap my brain around that. That was exciting and challenging for sure. But initially I'd say that my first impulse is always to try to think of how I would stage it. What is the visual world that goes, or the world of sound also? What is that world that will hold that writing, hold that complex idea that Jonathan's created, and deliver it, make it readable and visible.
And were you doing research as such as well, or were you just sort of talking to each other, really?
I left most of the research to Jonathan, and that was a real pleasure. Such a relief, knowing just already when he approached me to begin with, he'd already done 5 years of writing and thinking and creating, and so the initial part was just me trying to keep up and catch up with what he had already discovered. So, yeah, I would definitely not consider my role in this collaboration to be the one of research.
And Jonathan, can you talk about where the title comes from and why you wanted it called that?
The word Betroffenheit came to me in a book by Anne Bogart, who is a theater maker, an American theater maker, and the book is called And Then We Act. And it was about creating work post 9/11. And there was this word, and her definition of this word I'd never seen, that felt strange in my mouth, that had a lot of syllables, and that looked like the combination of like a sneeze or a cry of anger or something, you know, a mysterious, alarming word. And her definition, just really struck me as, again, some of the words in her definition were like a fertile and palpable silence in the wake of an event, where language ceases, where only the limits of language can be taken in, where everything is up for grabs. Sense of being stopped, met, struck, not struck. And so what I loved about that word was that there was no English equivalent. It didn't translate well, which again felt like the experience of PTSD. And also that there was both positive and negative potential bound up in that word. We were worried for a long time that it was too obscure and it would push somebody away. I find myself always drawn by things I don't understand, and Crystal often says that too, but what drives her in her work is she's interested in what she can't grasp. But
it stuck. We couldn't shake it.
And Crystal, you said that part of the appeal in terms of making a description of something into theatre was that this word is actually sort of untranslatable. It's very hard to express, and that you were working therefore in the space created by that, a word not making sense, which gives you dance in a sense. Can you talk a bit about that?
Well, I think because I always feel that conflict is a great kind of pressure to have in a work, in the creation of something. I think that there was conflict inherent in the word, just as you spoke about, Jonathan, with the positive elements and the negative elements of the word. That you're grappling in the content of the piece. You're grappling with kind of an unimaginable experience. And huge unanswerable questions, which for me, as you said, it's that kind of space that I feel the most alive as a creator, the most challenged and the most awake, the most terrified, most vulnerable, and so for me, it becomes a real engine to work with things that I really don't understand, and things that I know that nobody else really understands either. That's also part of it. There was something about this idea of Betroffenheit as being stuck and stopped, but also vibrating, and I think that became a theme within the work as well, this feeling of having the accelerator and the brake on at the same time, feeling being paralyzed and of wanting to run at the same time. And there's something, a beautiful tension in that, and I found that very motivating. And in many aspects, in the staging of things, in how I conducted myself during the day, and how I built choreography within a single dancer's body, but also how I built choreography across all of the performers' bodies. So I think I was really motivated by the conflict inherent in the word, and the conflict inherent in the content.
Diane, is Betroffenheit something that a psychiatrist treating PTSD would recognise as a state? I mean, is it a description of something that you've encountered?
I saw the show last night, and I was blown away, I would say, by the I guess it was really a profound experience of what I see in my patient's experience, the way that the dance unfolded. I felt like you did a beautiful job of capturing what my patients described to me is going on in their head, and I think they struggle to be able to articulate that as well. So I was really startled, I would say, at how well you captured what my experience with PTSD has been through my patients.
I mean, is it something that, is PTSD something that we're learning more about as time goes on? I mean, is it, it's had a relatively recent, inclusion in the psychiatric canon. I mean, is it a state that people are beginning to understand more, and does art have a role in that understanding, do you think?
I would say PTSD has been around forever, just like every other psychiatric disorder, but we really don't know what causes any psychiatric disorder. When I treat with medication, if I'm treating with an antidepressant or an antipsychotic, truly we're treating symptoms. We're not down in the roots of these disorders yet. We're out in the leaves. We're treating symptoms because they're complex. Psychiatric disorders are biopsychosocial, so there is a biology to these disorders. They're bipolar disorder, ADHD, these are truly the most biological, the most genetic, but psychosocial factors, just the way you popped out. Are you a resilient person? Are you a vulnerable person? How do you manage stress? That's the psychological makeup you have. And then there's the social aspect. You come back from being, in Yugoslavia, and your wife's had an affair, and your kid's being dragged off to jail, and your house is being foreclosed on. Those are important psychosocial stressors that can also increase your risk of developing post-traumatic stress disorder. So now even the last 2 weeks, there was an incredible finding in schizophrenia, a gene that has been found that is clearly associated with schizophrenia. So we're learning every day more about the biological aspect, the inflammatory basis of these disorders. But it's been around as long as there's been trauma, there's been PTSD.
Mm-hmm.
We just called it that more recently.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing the work does, Jonathan, is deal not just with that PTSD, but also with the associated condition of addiction.
Mm-hmm.
And I wondered why you wanted to explore the two together.
Again, from personal experience, I found myself drawn to that as an avenue to escape my predicament, and an option that provided instant euphoria and instant escape, and also renewed interest in life. I mean, I think that that's what, for me, addiction is it makes life colorful and rich and inspiring. And I think that the part of the problem, the thing one suffers post-trauma is that all of that has been drained from life. What you held as valuable is gone. What you were responsible to is now no longer, you're no longer accountable because you're traumatized. There's a whole bunch of factors which can detach you from your own life, and I think that Diane and I were just talking about this, that we have this built-in safety mechanism of disassociation, especially at the height of trauma, where we can detach. And the traumatized person can remain detached for years after. And an addictive substance is, I'm back, I'm here. All of that wall that had been built up is permeable, and we can talk, I'm interested. And the more I dug into what was driving me towards my addictions was interest. And I think that that's where we came upon the idea of this epiphany, just looking for a glimmer of a solution, something that I can hold on to. And I also immediately recognized the theatrical potential in addiction because of the glitz and the color and like that you'll see in the show. Our show gets overtaken by something called the show. So a stand-in version that has immediate rewards. We immediately recognize the potential for those two sides to be working together to create a very dangerous tension.
Chris, do you want to talk a bit about how you created the show, how you, embody a thought, really? I mean, addiction's a state, and you have to embody it. So why did you come up with the show, and how did that come about?
Well, I guess the original inspiration for the show was your early writings, and as you were saying earlier, this thing of this loop of an old system of a show, some kind of event or attraction that was playing in a loop, but whose the purpose had long been lost and wasn't really helping anymore. So that was, I guess, the initial germ of the idea that our metaphor, that our image for what the substance would be that our protagonist is chasing, that it would be Showtime. And that we would make a variety show that would be kind of a stand-in for this substance. And interestingly, when we first meet our protagonist, he's clean and he's sticking to his system of everything he needs to do in order to avoid doing a show. But when Showtime finally does infiltrate the space, when he finally gives into it and lets it back in, we feel the same relief that he feels. And we are caught up in the pleasure and the seduction and the sparkle of it just as much as he is. And when we were making our show, I think it was also a great distraction for us in our process. We were dealing with this difficult content and this very intense story, and to be able to spend the afternoon working on a tap number was really great. It was really joyful. And ultimately we had to find a way to take that variety show and twist it and make it become dangerous and destructive and let it and take over, so that ultimately we understand it as a destructive force. But there is this kind of honeymoon period there.
Diane.
You're probably aware that addiction is ubiquitous in mental illness, so it's exceedingly common. And most people suffer from mental illness very alone. We don't celebrate someone coming out of an acute episode of depression or of psychosis the way we do if someone survives cancer. People don't go around saying, I'm a depression survivor, unfortunately, because their illness is like any other illness. And I think, when I think of the military members, I worked as a civilian at CFB Halifax for 3 years, and so many of the people that I saw would say to me, I wish my legs had been blown off, because that way at least people would see what was wrong with me. So that being trapped in your brain, having all this going on, and not being able to escape the pain that's constantly there, and one of the ways that they escape is by music. And so it is exceedingly common in PTSD that people abuse, not just substances, but they gamble and all kinds of behaviors that allow them to escape.
I mean, is that part of a kind of, Jonathon's feeling that it allows you to engage in a way? It's not just escape, it is an engagement in life, if you like.
It's an escape from what's going on inside your head. You have had the experience, so you can speak better to that, but this is what my patients tell me, this horrible image and thoughts and feelings that you don't have to be attached to them, but you're right, also to be able to have a connection with the people around you that love you, that are trying to draw you back, and now you're social again, and I'm doing all this exciting stuff again, and so it does pull people out, but it doesn't last very long, and the drop afterwards is even more profound.
And for me, it wasn't so much about escaping what was going on in my head or escaping the fact that I'd lost loved ones. It was rather that I could feel again. That's in the piece too, the sense of feeling, and that there's meaning in it, and that there's poetry in it. For me, that's what my addiction gave me, was poetry and interest and meaning. And that was the allure for me, was that promise, which of course ultimately becomes manufactured and repetitive, and finally like a trap, right? And the illusion of meaning.
That is absolutely such a common experience of PTSD, is not feeling. And when we think of depression, which is really probably 70% of people who have PTSD also eventually go through an experience of depression. Most of us, when we think about depression, we think about being sad. But you have to, if you're meeting the criteria, the DSM criteria for major depression, one criteria you have to have is sadness, but you might not be sad. The other criteria is what's called anhedonia, or a lack of interest or loss of pleasure in things you would normally enjoy. And in my experience, anhedonia is a more profound way of me establishing that person is actually depressed, because a lot of people will say, no, I'm not sad, I actually feel nothing.
I think, having seen it twice now, I think one of the triumphs of the show is that he does manage to both be specific and universal. It does build itself from your experience into something that I think a lot of people would identify with, and that is to do with how you decided to sort of decentralize the voice, and it's all your voice, but there are many voices. And I wonder if you talk a bit about that, Jonathan, first, then perhaps Crystal too.
Part of it was the fact that we knew we had an interesting structural problem, which is that we had 5 dancers who weren't going to speak and 1 actor who was going to speak. And yet we knew that it didn't want to feel, the show, our end result, didn't want to feel like a lead character who was an actor with 5 backup dancers. We knew that the people that Crystal has worked with over these years, these astonishing dancers, need to be central to the performance, because they're so profoundly beautiful in the way they move, and it's expressive. So we needed to find a way somehow to make them feel like they were as part of this disordered system, as central to it as the guy who talks, and as in need of rescue or in need of embrace. So that was a constant conversation, how we could make them feel also like a part of the protagonist. And one of the ways right off the bat was to get the voice outside of me and let the voice become one of the mechanisms that is shaping this place in which the performers are operating.
Absolutely. One of the first ideas we had, I think, was to have, as part of our variety show, our protagonist in relationship with the ventriloquist dummy, like as if that the ventriloquist act was part of the variety show. It's funny enough, we never really used that act in our shows so overtly, but what we did get out of that was the opportunity to double Jonathon right away, so that he's in a dialogue with his own voice through the body of the puppet or the sidekick, I don't know what we call him, who in our cast is Jermaine. So right away we had a way of getting Jonathon in dialogue with himself, and being able to really physicalize his second voice in that way. And it became kind of a, I guess, just like the starting off point for how we did that with the rest of the scene. That's okay.
You didn't make the announcement.
So we wanted to explore having Jonathon's voice split into many different places. That it would come out of, sometimes it would come out of another performer, one of the dancers, like, and they would lip sync it, or they would either with their mouth, or they would kind of lip sync it with their bodies. That was one idea. And the idea was to have the voice come out of objects, and so sometimes you'll hear it coming out of a speaker, or a light fixture, or a doorway, or just the full surround sound in the house. So we could really continue this idea of decentralizing the voice and having it be part of a disordered system that our protagonist is living inside.
And further to that, I mean, obviously those who haven't seen the show, it is in 3 acts, and one part of one act is very much dance without the voice. And so I wondered how you made those decisions about the voice and silence, and when you bring in, and those dance bits actually are equally very expressive of the central ideas. So just can you talk a little about that?
We were wondering if after the audience returns, after the intermission, that we have the sense that some time has passed, and that perhaps some progress is being made, some change is happening. And how that change might be actually very painful and very challenging. And so we, for the first, I think it's about 20 minutes, it's just full on, full out dancing, as if the performers are attacking each other and rescuing each other, sometimes in the same moment. They're in a state of extreme emotion and physicality. Somebody wrote to us, didn't they, that that whole dance sequence is like the climax of a dance piece. The whole thing is like they're at that kind of level, and we wanted it to look as if the show had lost its voice in a way. That you spoke about this so beautifully the other day. How to describe this state that they're in. But a state of Betroffenheit, in the sense that it's wordless or untranslatable beyond language, and it's a state. They are surviving in it and suffering in a state of being.
And I often read it too as a state of withdrawal. Of it's that time of when you're shut off from that thing you need, knowing that the only way through now is to just go through it, and how painful that can be, but how often there is a little glimmer of something on the other side, and that, again, like you said, there is some transformation. At least we're outside of the room. At least we've lost the room.
That's actually what I thought it was withdrawal.
Yeah, good. Yeah.
And how have audiences reacted? I mean, have people I mean, I find it kind of deeply moving, and also actually quite frightening. I think one of its qualities is that it's frightening, but I wonder how audiences in general have reacted.
Well, they've reacted strongly and passionately, and we've done a couple of talks. I did a really profound half-hour conversation with an audience who had just come out of it in Toronto, and I had some beautiful exchanges with people who had seen it. One, a guy who was in recovery and had come to see it 4 times. And just the look in his eyes, he just really needed to tell me that, you know, he knew. He gave me a shirt and some music, and we had this really beautiful exchange. And a woman who had been diagnosed with PTSD again, who said, that's it, and my whole problem has been the inability to say what it is. And that was it. And so, I mean, that was just so moving for me. And I have been filled with doubt and dread this whole time that it would be somehow making a spectacle of my own suffering and the things that happened to me. And that was my worst fear, that it would be somehow self-indulgent, and that the only merit it would have would be people looking in and, oh, what a tragic story. And so just to hear that people are seeing themselves in it or seeing others was really rewarding. Yeah.
And Krista, you said that you've felt it was the most important piece that you've made, and is that because it has these qualities of dealing with these sort of huge themes?
Big questions, big unanswerable questions, and I think one of the things I love about the show is that what we come to is that this quest for an epiphany in a way leads to the realization that there is no epiphany, that that moving on means a daily practice and a kind of work that's ongoing forever. And there's something strangely comforting in that, because that feels manageable, feels doable.
And from your point of view, Diane, I mean, that complexity, it seemed to me, is quite rare to see in an artwork. I mean, does that make sense to you therapeutically?
You would never describe me as an aficionado of the arts. I don't know what I'm talking about, really. But I don't know how to say it. You captured so much of my experience through my patients in a way that I was startled. Every aspect of it really, it fit with my experience. And you can't ever be inside someone's head, right? Everyone has their own journey, but there are some common themes with every disorder that people suffer from, and my whole belief and understanding was like playing out in front of me in a way that I don't usually experience the world. I'm a little more of a linear kind of person, so I was startled at how beautifully you did that.
I have a question for you. In terms of seeing your patients moving towards recovery, what does that look like? What are some of the things that happens to them, or what are some of the things that they do? And did you see any of that in what we were doing?
I wanted to mention about the epiphany, because that was something I had to learn as well. I'm learning constantly as my patients are learning in front of me as well, that there is no epiphany. And sometimes Veterans Affairs is a great example of where people come back and they're injured and they're being put out of the military and they have to go through Veterans Affairs, and sometimes it's a horrible battle, or they're injured on a work site and they have to deal with work safety or whatever. And people feel once I get this, once that's done, once the judge has made the decision, then it'll all change. It never changes. That is not ever a time of profound positive forward movement. And I had to have that hit me in the face 30 times before I actually started to say to people, that's not going to be the answer. So the epiphany part, when you just mentioned that, I just forgot while I was speaking, that was really very profound for me, because I have learned that those things that people hold on to that they think will be the thing that makes all the difference is not. And it's the slow re-engagement with the people that love you and with your life, and having those connections again, and playing the piano again, and being able to read again. Those very little steps back to your real life, those are the things that are so important. Unfortunately, I've had the experience, because a lot of people when they have PTSD are really, really sick, and it's very difficult to find the right treatment, and there's psychological treatment, there's medical treatment. You finally turn this around, and if you've had a partner who's lived it with you, I would say that 100% of the time, when I was working with the military, as soon as the individual started to get well, their partner got sick. Because they were lifting the weight of this individual over years. And so then I started to realize, I gotta treat this whole family, and I've gotta keep them all together, because you don't suffer alone. You suffer with the people that love you. The people that love you suffer along with you.
Mm-hmm.
Did you want to?
No.
It's an interesting thing to me. I mean, being the opposite of you, sort of spending my life in the arts world, about the value of work that has thought in it, as well as being about art. So it would be, even if it had no kind of interest beyond itself, a very beautiful piece. It is extraordinarily beautiful, it's very strong, you know, the movement's great. But how much did it matter to you, Jonathon, that it wasn't just a kind of a beautiful image, that you had got somewhere towards explaining the things that you felt so strong, and Crystal as well?
You know, if it had just been a beautiful piece, that would have been okay for me too. If it had just been something that you could bring only your own associations to, and that there was no particular, if it was just a beautiful piece, I would have been happy as well. But one thing I'm particularly good, I think, at doing as an artist is making problems and disordering and burrowing down into places from which there is no exit. And it's then that I rely on my collaborators to say, isn't this an interesting dilemma? I have no idea how to get out of here. And so most of the content that I was generating was about the problems of my thinking, the problems of my actions, and the problems of the disorder as opposed to the solutions. So there's drama in problems, but when I found myself, you know, writing about this very personal story that had happened to me, and knowing that I had to honor it in some way, and not turn it into something that was terrible for terrible's sake, or, you know, just again putting more pain out into the world. It became about how do we go down to the depths of this and come out without also solving it and saying, here's the solution, folks. It's actually, you know, it's
You and
okay.
I are polar opposites. I am the fixer. We have to have solutions. That's all I do. So
Yeah.
you're trying to dig the hole, and I'm saying, oh,
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
Two sides of society.
Great divide.
Yeah.
And what's Crystal's role?
Bridging the gap.
I think you bring up a great point, which is when you're making a piece of theater, it is much easier to work with conflict than it is to work with harmony. And do you remember in our 3-act structure on the wall, there was a Post-it note somewhere near the end that said, a healthy system thrives. And I remember getting to that Post-it and going, I can't stage that. I can't stage, I don't want to stage that. A healthy system thrives. What does that even look like?
I wrote it for Crystal to do. And now you
That was
can
a
tell.
scene that we were going to make.
Yeah.
A healthy system thrives. And you remember that? I was like, I can't stage that.
This is my life.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's your life.
That's interesting.
I want a healthy system.
Yeah, yeah.
But you're right, it's trying to reconcile the need for good theater and you know, the ease that comes with digging down deep and going into that problematic territory, because it is very, very generative, and it's alive, and it's full of tension and idea, and then how do you also then make compelling the journey back out and the striving for a solution. That's the hard part as a theater maker.
And so how did that happen? How did you manage, because that is it, how did you manage to do that?
Well,
Yeah. I think part of it was that the voice returned to help the physicality. I mean, I think that there was something just formally about that the pendulum had swung far in the other direction, and the language, which gets us into so much trouble in part 1 and part 2, is removed from the situation, and we go into this kind of free fall, this struggling, and the language comes back in and pulls it up a bit, and then the physicality does it, and the language does it, and then the physicality does it. I mean, I think there's just something very formal about that kind of progression. And also I think that we set up at the beginning that our protagonist is looking for an epiphany, that he found one at the bottom before, and he finds one at the end, but it's a glimmer. And essentially it is about, you know, he knows he has to stop responding and has to stop reaching for these people who he's lost. And it's in the realization that they're in this attempt to articulate and to do and to move, that they're in the attempt, I think, is where he gets to. And that is kind of what we were talking about just a few moments ago, about the daily practice as opposed to the thing in the future that will be the solving, the turning point, the ultimate final change. It's in this attempt that maybe that's where the balance is restored, or there's hope or something, a glimmer.
I'm going to come to you for your questions in a moment, so think, got any. But Crystal, just as a dance maker, and specifically as a dance maker, what was the hardest thing about this for you? What was the kind of thing that you most grappled with?
I think it was what Jonathon was saying. I think, yeah, what Jonathon was saying earlier about trying to make sure that I didn't make a show where Jonathon was a mouthpiece and people danced around him. Trying to find ways to integrate and make absolutely essential every performer on the stage, and to use that as a way of making the show universal. And so that was just an ongoing challenge day to day, having to continually check in with that. So I feel good about that. I think that we did a good job of that.
Do people have questions that they would like to ask, so that I don't go? Lady there?
Do you want me to talk into the mic?
If you stand up and say
Stand up
that,
and shout, and I'll repeat it.
I'll try to shout it. That was really rich and wonderful, thank you. I was interested in the concept when you were talking about addiction as both a longing for life, and the Showtime seems to have a lot of vitality. I haven't seen it yet, but the way that you're describing it, I'm seeing it tonight. And I was wondering if in the arc of the story, not moving towards an epiphany, but is there kind of an integrative where some elements of Showtime or some elements of that longing are gesturing towards life, like addiction not as just pathology, but also as longing, are integrated in some way physically in the performance?
So is addiction as a pathology sort of integrated in the performance, that it's not just longing, it has got a sort of...
No, the reverse.
The other way,
Yeah.
sorry. Yeah, so it's not just pathological,
Yeah.
it's something else.
Yes.
A longing.
A longing.
Yeah, and the sense of life that's in the Showtime.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are results that happen within Showtime. There are new heights that are reached, and there's the sense, I think, of that our protagonist has reached not like a kind of spiritual connection when he's at the height of using. One of the things we hear at the beginning of the show before he starts using again is once it starts, it doesn't stop. And what is it? Once it's on, you forget it's on, and once it starts, it doesn't stop. So it's laid out at the beginning that there is the deception factor. But I think I, as the performer, forget that has been said to me on stage when I'm in the height of the song, and there's a conversation with the puppet, and there's, you know, the voice gets outside of me, we look at the room differently. It's like it does yield results, and I think that does come from a spiritual longing, a place of longing, and there's also a line in the song saying it doesn't matter what it took me, and it doesn't matter how much, because here we are, we've done it. And the problem with addiction, of course, is the bottom can drop out, and you can be left with less than you had when you started.
Do you want to say anything? Other questions? Oh.
I have a question. Remind me the name of the sound composer and the sound designer and composer. It's Owen something.
Owen.
Owen Belton, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, I had a question regarding that, because you guys have spoken about the roles that you had, Jonathon being, the catalyst for the story and the main researcher, Crystal being the director and sort of transforming the show. But sound is such a pivotal thing about the show. It's huge, and it plays, your voices, many characters through the sound design. So I guess I'm wondering where Owen came in as a designer, because it seems to have shaped the show considerably through the sound design. A lot of the movements are even based on the sounds, and so I guess just wondering about that process and where.
So we actually worked with 3 sound designers.
Oh.
Owen is one of them, composers and sound designers, and the other 2 are Meg Rowe and A.J. Giuliani. And we initially kind of divided up the task of the sound design into it's more text-based and sound effect-based, so more theatrical elements we handed over to Meg and AJ. And Owen took care of a lot more of the underscoring and the composing of more musical passages in the show. But inevitably things crossed over and it became very gray, in a good way, it became very gray what was sort of theater and what was sort of the more sort of text-based things, and which were the more music-based things as things started to weave together. So we, with the sound design team, as well as all of the design team, Jay Taylor is our set designer, Nancy Bryant is our costume designer, and Tom Visser is our lighting designer. He came in at the end more. But we had early meetings, like right from the very beginning. We had great sessions around the table, brainstorming together and trying to shape not just the visual world of the show, but also the sound world and how we were going to do that. And Jonathon, during the process of writing the show, often would write a passage of text and then record his own voice. I think as a way of getting a bit of distance from it, being able to, and also just to give it a bit more shape, like just give us a sense of how it might work. And then these things became like little artifacts in and of themselves, and we were able to use them and repurpose them and experiment with how we might, decentralize the voice and bring it out of different places. Very complex sound design, and a very complex process to pull it all together. But incredible people working on it.
There's somebody at yes there.
Hi, I'm Jen, and I'm an actor and a playwright in the community. And I came last night, and I have a random question that anyone can answer. My experience of it last night was as a witness. I basically cried for a full 2 hours, and I saw the whole show through tears. And it's like I have my own story of tragedy and grief in my early life, and it fuels a lot of my creative world now. But I'm just interested about the value of witnessing in PTSD and the distinction between witness and audience. So I was looking up stuff earlier today and trying to, find a place for that, because I know that, a lot of the stuff that I went through was never witnessed, and that was part of the isolation, and then later on found witness in performance, but never directly. So I'm just curious about that. I know it's kind of a vague, crazy question, but if anybody can answer it. Witnessing versus audience, and what the expectations were, if there was any even languaging around that.
No, I think, are you getting at the idea of...
I get it, an idea is really much.
I'm just thinking about my patients who see excellent psychologists who actually witness their pain. They're able to share a story that maybe they've been hiding all their lives. They've never shared with anyone else, and I mean, it's a privilege to be part of my patients' lives, and I think most of my psychologist colleagues feel the same way, that there's a value to hearing a story from a patient's perspective. Someone's hearing it, they're saying, first of all, I believe you, and I understand why you're feeling so terrible about this, and I can help.
There was that. There's also, there's not even like a Christian word I could use, but like in Judaism, there's a mitzvah. There's some sort of thing around John and Kim and knowing everything and like carrying it as a member of the community, like taking it in. So I was sitting in a row with a bunch of people who knew stuff, and everyone was losing it, but losing it in a way that we felt we needed to. And then what do we do? You know, so to carry it, but carry it clean and usefully, you know? So there were just like, yeah, there were people that I was surrounded by who went, oh, that was great, and they went out for a smoke, you know? But I wasn't one of those people. And other people in my row were not those people either. We were kind of huddled together going, now what? So
I think there's a real value to witnessing mental illness and walking away with an understanding of someone else's experience, because one of the greatest challenges in mental health is the stigma that continues, and we're all fine to say, oh yeah, I'm fine with someone's got depression, but when it comes down to it, do you really accept people who have these issues? And I think they still remain very isolated. Many of my patients, they're trapped in themselves, but they're also trapped in society and being viewed as mentally ill and seen through that lens. I don't know if that's a useful comment.
The dance interpretation of the protagonist, is that as a result of the thoughts and events of you?
Yeah, I think some of it, definitely. And then the question was, is the choreography the depiction of my own experiences? Some of it, and some of it is just born out of what we created in the room together and responding to the script, which some of it is literally my own experience, and some of it is pushing my own experience into something, you know, further or different than what happened to me. It was an artistic collaboration that we followed it and found out where it would go. And yeah.
The second part is, how did you make that decision as a playwright, to include dance?
I approached Crystal early on to see if she would direct this piece that might be a one-man show. I didn't know. I just knew that having Crystal's skills as a choreographer and to collaborate with her on something like this would add a whole other aspect to the show that I didn't have the ability to come near creating on my own. So, I think we have time for one more.
Yeah.
I just wanted to comment on what you were saying, for me also as a performer, I think, and this idea of witnessing, it's just a very powerful ritual that we share as performers, and I just want to say thank you for what you've done, because even if the questions are not necessarily answered, or what you say that the epiphany may never be reached, it's like we hold the space for those questions, and it's a really powerful ritual that brings people together. So I just want to say thank you for that.
Well, I think thank you is a good moment to end on, because it's an extraordinary piece, and Crystal, Jonathon and Diane have talked about it so interestingly, and thank you all for being here and listening. So thank you.